Welcome back to another episode of the Elite Body and Performance Podcast. And today we are joined by my coach, Mr. Nick Gloff, who I've been working with since right at the very end of January. And he's helped me across my journey of getting ready for my most recent photo shoot, which I could not be more grateful for. And I'm really, really pleased with the condition that we brought to photo shoot day. And I thought it'd be really interesting to bring it on to the podcast and just talk a little bit about our methodology, our thought process throughout, and effectively how we got there. So welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Absolute pleasure to have you here. Just for those listening who don't know who you are, it'd be really cool just to explain a little bit about yourself, what you do, where you're from, and a little bit more about who is Mr. Nick Gloff.
Okay. So first of all, I'm from the States. So I'm originally from Western New York, and I live in Florida now, and I have for the last 3 years down here in Stewart. So I'm here local to that Revive gym that has now become famous thanks to the likes of Brett Wilkin and Ian, Nick Walker, and Bumstead. So
yeah.
Yep. So this is home for me at this point. And so I grew up my whole life up in Western New York and went to school up there as well. So I went to school for kinesiology and exercise science. While in school for both of those degrees, I had also done some work in a biomechanics lab for a few years, working on rate of force development with EMG research. So I have a little bit of a specified background as far as that goes. Absolutely. And that kind of shines through with a lot of the things that I do with my own athletes, and a lot of what I guess would shine through on my social media and the things that I tend to talk about, because a little bit more of my general focus, although I am a coach that does everything, my focus and my passion and everything is pretty much training. Absolutely. That's really where that's my favorite area, because it's just what I got into to start with, and that's just what guided me through the path to where I am now.
Of course. Yeah. And that's one thing that I really liked as well, because I'm an athlete from my past as well, in the sport of football. So everything, has always been stemmed around training. So I know for me, if my training's good, everything else is like a big domino effect, right? It's like the big dominoes, the training, you feel good and motivated for nutrition and for locking in lifestyle. So that's one thing that I really loved as well. And safe to say we're overqualified from a training perspective, which is really cool too. So throughout like our journey, what would you kind of say was the main kind of thought process when we kind of started right at the very front end? Because obviously we started not necessarily needing to strip too much down, right? I suppose we was in a somewhat lean position. So what would you say was kind of like the original thought process in regards to getting shredded whilst maintaining a level of energy for training and so forth?
Well, you made it pretty easy on me, honestly, because you're giving yourself a little bit too little credit for the starting point that you were at. You were already starting lean enough to where, like, thinking about the timelining that we had, because that's usually where most people struggle the most. Is that you come in with the expectation of, okay, I have photo shoot or I'm getting on stage or whatever in 16 weeks or 20 weeks, or even all the way up to 30 weeks. And you're just completely not able to do so because of the amount of body fat that you have.
Yeah,
and you underestimate that. But you didn't do that. You came in the opposite way, going, I don't know if we'll be able to exactly do this perfectly in time. Do you think we can do it? But you were already lean enough to be like, okay, yeah, we have plenty of time.
Yeah,
we can however we need to, and everything's going to turn out in the end. So
absolutely,
we'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, do you know what? That's where I actually spoke about it on my social media not too long ago. Is I've always been like quite a perfectionist, and for me, it stemmed back from my footballer days when I was going for constant trials at professional clubs, and they'll say you're good, but not good enough for a professional contract. And I've always just had this mindset of I need to do more. Like I need to have that time. So if I'm lean, I can get stupidly lean and have, vascularity coming out my ears. But yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, when we got there on the front end, I knew the time frame would be more than fine. It's like, is it going to be perfect? But no, I think, we got nice and ready quite early. And one thing I quite enjoyed to do, and, we discussed on the front end, was kind of saying, we want to get ready early so we can pump a bit more food into us on the back end. right? And kind of trial a few different approaches and see what my body responds to best. So, for those that are listening that want to get, ready for stage and or photo shoot, would you say like one of the biggest things is be ready early so you can either A, pump more food back in, or B, pump food in more specifically to trial different approaches for like a peak week, if you will?
Especially for somebody that's doing it for the first time with a coach.
Yeah.
That is key. Being able to get there early enough at least allows you enough trials to figure out what might be the right path to go for you to get them to look the right way by the time that the shoot or the show comes up. Because you're
Absolutely.
not going to know exactly. Because, for example, with you, knowing that you can handle an immense amount of food is something that we wouldn't have known if we had just gotten you there and ready that same week that you were going to be doing your shoot. Trying out what we did on our first practice peak to try and get you to peak that week would have been a complete flop.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It would have
absolutely.
been what? It would have been almost maybe just about 60% of what it actually was that we got you peaking on. And it would have been for half of the days that I would have you peaking on. So the amount of total going in was going to be a ridiculous distance from what you needed if we had gotten you ready early enough.
Yeah, I think the first peak, if I'm not mistaken, was 3.9K across 2 days, I believe.
Yep.
And then we obviously went through actual peak week at 5.8K over like 4 or 5 days. And God, I'll tell you what, I've never had so much fun with food in my entire life. But I think a big part that I don't want to skim past just there that we spoke about is also managing expectation. So I know you touched on just there, like a lot of people saying that, right, they come in, they've got too much body fat and that they want to get shredded, they want to get super lean for stage or shoot, or even if it is more lifestyle, like I know a lot of our guys listening to this podcast as well, it might be for holidays, right? Or it might be for the summer period. And it's like managing expectations to understand, do we have enough time frame, or is the time frame perfectly? And again, you maybe not giving yourself enough credit for the work that you can put in. How much of the job would you say on the front end is actually managing expectation? I suppose more from a shoot or a prep for a stage perspective.
It's massive. If you don't handle people's expectations right off the front end, they will build their expectations for you. And if you don't get in front of that early enough, then it's going to be too ingrained for you to be able to change it by the time that they're actually there. It's one of those things where when you're going through the difficulties of dieting that hard to get into show shape or just getting into photo shoot shape, you're going to have to rely on something mentally as a cue that's going to keep you on track.
Absolutely.
And as you're doing that, you're going to continue to like hammer that same head every single time that you have to. Just, okay, we're doing it. We're doing it. We're doing it. This is why we're doing it. And this is why. And as that keeps on ingraining itself and you keep on getting that mental image of what you intend for it to be, when it may not match the reality of what's possible for you, then the difference between where you actually will be and where you imagine yourself to be are going to be so drastically different that it doesn't matter how good you are by the time that you're done. You're just going to be so horribly unsatisfied with the process that it's going to ruin you by the end.
Yeah. And I think, it's so important to, because, when we run people through photo shoots as well, it's not just managing expectation from a physique perspective, but also like an energy and I suppose like libido and these kind of things, and almost managing expectation there. Because I think a lot of the time people will kind of run into this scenario or getting ready for, I suppose, especially if it's their first shoot or their first stage prep, right? And thinking, oh, I just get super shredded and, it'll be all right. I just increase my steps, and that's what I've got to do, right? But then when you kind of got to get to that point where you kind of got to go to those deeper, darker places when energy is low, when libido is low, right? When I suppose lifestyle fulfillment is you can't go out and have meals out as much as you maybe used to, right? Because you're in that kind of crunching space. And one thing that I think it's amazing from that perspective, and one thing that I kind of lean on and why we use this to our advantage massively with the members we run through on photo shoots as well, is saying how much like you would learn about yourself in those periods of time. So I think the journey of a photo shoot is unbelievable from an aesthetics perspective, right? But how much you actually gain from outside the perspective of just aesthetics when you learn, fuck, I can handle a lot. I'm stronger than I thought. My mindset's now better than it used to be. And I found for me, my structure day to day, like I had to be so dialed in with nutrition, like don't miss a beat, eat at a certain time, you know, the quantity had to be perfect, that naturally I became more structured my day to day. Like my steps were getting done at the same time, same route. My work day started at the same time every day. Like everything was so dialed in. Do you find that's one thing that members that kind of do stage and shoot also kind of find as well?
Yes, but the most common thing is that people end up crumbling in front of that pressure. And
Yeah.
so that's,
Yeah.
yeah. So you luckily enough already have enough going on that you had a good structure in place, that having it just shored up a little bit and
Yeah.
gotten tightened down a little bit further wasn't too big of a leap for you.
Absolutely.
There's way more people than people like you that are
Right.
going to have a problem with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, of
that
course.
that's one of the biggest reasons why almost every single coach that will ever open their mouth about this will say that the best move that you could ever make is getting with your coach at least a full season removed from when you're going to be trying to do a show prep or a photo shoot
Yeah.
prep or anything like this. Just because of the fact that if you can get them early enough, you can get them focused on all the lifestyle routine, all the little habits, the mental expectations start that early rather than once the dieting starts and they're really like emotionally motivated.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's instilled through a discipline practice instead of the emotional drive of, oh man, I'm going to be pretty much naked on stage in 4 months.
Yeah, of course.
That that works. It's a good motivator, but
Yeah.
when like everything in their own life is starting to like peel apart and have a hard time holding together because it was never organized in the first place. It
Mm.
was just the chaos that they understood as their normal life
Yeah. Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
there, and now it just blows to pieces. It's
Absolutely.
really hard for them to continue on and make progress after that emotional motivation starts to dwindle. And that starts happening when the times get hard.
Of course.
If you're there early enough, you can actually get them to figure out, okay, what's my sleep schedule going to be like? How can I make that stick? When am I going to wake up? What am I going to do the first 20 minutes I'm awake? Because that matters.
Yeah,
Am I going
absolutely.
to
Yeah.
have exactly when I'm going to start having my first meal every single day? Am I going to have all of my meals pre-made the night before and packed so that my day is easy the next day and I
Yeah.
don't have any chance? Like any of these like little things that you don't think about up until you start a prep needed to have been thought about 6 months before that.
Absolutely. And I know like from my perspective of getting ready for a shoot is different to stage, right? Like I know a lot of people step on stage would have to dig a hell of a lot deeper. I know we still dug extremely deep, but they, you know, stepping on stage is obviously a different ball game. But even with myself, if I missed a beat with one of my small habits, it would chuck me off everywhere else. Like if my evening routine, let's say I went to sleep an hour later than usual, the next day I'm thinking, oh fuck, I'm gonna be tired today with an hour's less sleep. And then maybe that alarm's 15 minutes later, and you know, everything just starts to kind of fall backwards from there. And I think that's one thing that a photo shoot prep or a stage prep would teach you is just extreme, you know, discipline and self-ownership and responsibility, right? Because I think the one thing I love about that, the journey of really digging in deep, is no one can do it for you and you can't cheat. Like there's no cheat code. Like no one can come here and do the sleep for you or do the training for you or do the nutrition for you. You've got to do it yourself, right? And I think that's where we learn so much about what we're capable of there, or you know, or maybe if you know, if we're not built for that kind of, you know, tough work ethic and lifestyle. But kind of looking at like the prep more specifically, obviously we decided to go through a bit more of a front you know, carb approach load. And you know, I suppose there's a lot of different approaches, you know, front carb load, back carb load, glycogen depleting workouts, water manipulation, diuretics, and all of these kind of things. And what kind of made us go for the approach of more of a front end, and why do you think that was maybe a little bit more superior for us?
So my thinking on that is that what we were already doing with your baseline diet was creating glycogen depleted workouts
Yeah. Well, yeah,
already.
absolutely.
You had nothing in you. So we were already pushing on that end of things. So what we needed to do, especially knowing that in the prior testing peaks that we had done, it's okay, 2 days at this amount. All right, we saw what we needed to see, wasn't quite enough. We had a little bit more to go. Try 3 days, try 4 days, try a little bit more food, put a little bit more in on each of the days, see what the pattern is like. See when the water is starting to accumulate around your midsection and little areas that typically would. Start to
Absolutely.
see where the film is building, see how long it takes for it to pull away, see what the difference between the morning weight and the evening weight is to see how your clearance is throughout that day with that amount of food. See what your digestion is like based off of how distended your gut might be when you wake up in the morning or when you get to bed at night.
Yeah.
See, all of these little things add up to being the variables that we need to be aware of because of the timing of when you were going to do your shoot.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Best thinking to do in this case is that already knowing that you're take a bit to load. You take
Yeah.
a bit to load, better idea is get in front of it early.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because what we couldn't do, what we could not afford to do, is the last day before thinking, okay, well, we're a little bit behind. So here's 7,000 calories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Because
would have
making up
taken it.
for, I'm sure you would have. But if we're thinking about it from a math perspective, if we had just
Yeah.
lost one day of loading with the amount of food that we were already putting in, we would have had to try and make up for that with at least a 20% increase on the base.
Yeah.
Probably more. So roughly around 7,000 calories is actually what it would have been
Yeah.
to give you as a single day or a second day of a 2-day load out of the amount of days that we already did. So
Absolutely.
if we were going to be doing that, you are likely to wake up in the morning with a film of water no matter what.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also, I suppose from a digestive perspective as well, actually being able to squeeze and contract that midsection with
Yep.
that much food load from the day prior would also be quite difficult.
Yes, exactly. So knowing how much weight that you do or do not float from evening to morning also tends to be important in that too.
Absolutely. And I think it was like course correcting, on those days leading into the shoot, the little things like the vitamin C and these things that are so small but made such a difference. So like when we did get and I suppose that's why you've got to be from like an attention to detail perspective on those right peak days just prior to the shoot, noticing, right, I do see like a little bit of a film right here, right, let's pump in, a little bit of vitamin C here, let's remove that little bit of film. Or it might be, right, digestively, I don't feel like it's okay, cool, let's pull back here and let's maybe introduce this or water or salt. And I think just having that attention to detail and I suppose being patient with it as well, and understanding that there is going to be parts that we might need to course correct, but as long as we're attentive on the ball. And I suppose a big one is honest, right? Because if I weren't honest with you about, right, this is how I feel, you weren't honest with me about, right, I see a little bit of film coming towards the lower back as well, like as an example, it would be like, right, like we're not singing off the same hymn sheet here. And I suppose with a coaching relationship, the way that you're going to pull maximum potential out of the result is through just pure honesty, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It
And one
takes a
thing
two-way
that,
street.
oh, that's
Go
it.
ahead.
Yeah, that's it. One thing that I thought would be really interesting to talk about is obviously I done my entire photo shoot prep natty, right? So I've never gone on PEDs, so performance enhancing drugs. And I would love to know what kind of approach would be different from the perspective of maybe loading or from the perspective of food and stuff. It, being natty and being, without any performance enhancing drugs, what do you think would have potentially been different if we had assistance, if you will? Or do you think it kind of runs quite similar, side by side? It's just one is obviously going to help a little bit more than the other, if you will.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty similar in the matter of what we do with food and water and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
The only difference would be if we had a bad situation pop up. It's like if we were to push extra hard. So we can use the example of what we did for if we were to backload you.
Right.
We were to backload you and have a not really good time of it. You put on a little bit extra water, things aren't going right, then with PEDs as a use, could use a diuretic in that case.
Right.
And that would probably have gotten you at least close to the fullness that you could have achieved, minus a little bit of the excess water in the sub-Q space, and that would have gotten you ready. But
Yeah.
aside from that, which isn't even a method that I tend to like using, because really the way that we did it for you and the way that I do it for all of my natural athletes works pretty consistently for enhanced athletes.
I bet. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we're all
Absolutely.
just human bodies. The only thing that you have is just a little bit extra. With the extra tools that you have to play with, for an example, you'd be trying to get a little bit more hardness or fullness out of somebody. You could use a specific drug compound for that.
Yeah.
You could use different ones for different effects if you were looking to do so. It's not a major effect that you're going to see a massive difference, but there's a little bit of superstition involved. There's a little bit of trial and error prior to that time that's involved, and just being lean enough for you to be able to see it and have enough muscle tissue for it to express itself.
Of course.
So there are some little differences, but honestly, they're so minuscule in the way that you actually approach a peak, it wouldn't change all that much. You pretty much, for as far as I'm concerned, with most PED changes throughout a prep, it's escalation when it's necessary, trying to keep away from excess aromatization,
Yeah.
and 5-alpha reduction, trying to keep that as minimal as you possibly can throughout the process so you can keep water away and keep some actual like mental issues getting in your way.
Yeah,
Keep
of
that.
course. Yeah, absolutely. And
And
do you
then
find like out? Sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Once you get towards the end, it's minor reductions of those things in favor of more oral types that are going to be faster acting, that you can make changes that will happen quickly and leave quickly if you need them to.
Yeah, which you need to do, I suppose, a little bit more testing on a peak week with PEDs, like kind of leading in ideally, seeing how like the body kind of responds.
Mm-hmm. Well, as far as like trying to do practice peaking, it's the same. It's the same thing. And then on the real peak, pretty much you're not going to be making all that many changes that are different from what we already did.
Yeah, absolutely. And outside of peak, is it quite similar throughout the process if you were on PEDs, as well, or in comparison to completely natty and natural as well?
Mm, I mean, keep on beating the same drum. It's pretty close to the same process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. I think it's to a degree, but it's not a magic trick, right? Like you still need to put in the work, have the training, have the nutrition, and have routine dialed in for it to even work anyway. But no, that's really interesting to know that it being assisted effectively runs quite side by side, quite similar. But it just obviously helps with that extra couple of percent, I guess as well. So in regard, go ahead.
There's something I can add to that, is that it kind of depends on the individual to a degree, because some people that make the choice to obviously stay natural, they're going to be at a bigger disadvantage than some others that are natural at the same time due to what their hormonal environment is like.
Right.
So in the case of somebody that has a little bit more issues on thyroid side specifically, because anytime that you're going to diet, whether you're natural or enhanced, your thyroid output's going to start to decrease over time as you keep putting caloric deficit stress on your body.
Of course.
Some people are more resilient to that. Some people are very much not.
Yeah.
So in the case of enhanced versus natural, having the ability to use supplemental thyroid hormone can make up for that problem, where if they were natural, they wouldn't be able to. And it's the same
Absolutely.
thing for sex hormones. And
Yeah.
so where everything pretty much runs as a process goes pretty much the same way all the way through to the end. The only thing that you have is you have pretty much, I would say, set it and forget it cycle for the majority of it, with a couple of changes all the way down to the end. It pretty much stays the same, aside from the fact that you have the supplementals that would at least get you there if you would have much bigger headaches and issues trying to get there if you were natural.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. And that is the thing, right? Being in a very deep deficit isn't necessarily the most healthiest place for the human body to be, right?
No.
At all. But again, when you're doing it for a craft, and I suppose I guess we kind of see it as like an art, right? It's a little bit like an art. So when you're doing it for that, you make those sacrifices as well. But I think the most important thing, right, for most people post shoot or stage is the diet after the diet, the reverse diet, the period of time after the diet. What would you say are the key considerations? And, I suppose what the process is that, for our listeners that we're going to follow to reverse our way out of an extremely deep deficit sensibly towards a maintenance and a surplus to then start growing tissue.
So the biggest things to start with is to already manage expectations of what's going to happen
Yeah,
after.
absolutely.
Yeah, because if you don't have the expectations already set that you're going to start putting on a little bit of weight, it's going to happen. You're going to have to be okay with it. You're
Yeah,
going to notice that you're going to carry a little bit more water just because there's a lot more food going in than your body was used to.
absolutely.
Activity changes are going to start to happen. All these things are going to start changing. And the way that you felt up to then, feeling like the hunger that you'd identified with, is a good place to be. When you no longer feel quite as hungry, you're going to start feeling a little weird about it.
That's it. That's one thing that I kind of experienced as well is my food focus, I think for me, I feel like I've had to be even more disciplined now than I was when I was in a deep deficit. Like I was just in such routine deep deficit that everything was clockwork. But now I've got a little bit more food to play because I found my food focus was very, very high throughout the dieting phase, just naturally because, you know, you're in a deficit, right? But I felt like almost coming up, my food focus has stayed in a similar place, but I suppose my reins have been loosened a little bit. So for me to like, I found for me the biggest time I've had to be super disciplined is actually after the deficit going into my reverse dieting phase. And that's been even more difficult for me. But, you know, we've got to do it, right? But that for me was one thing that I've really had to dial in.
Yep. And that is what we all say as prep coaches to every single person. It's not the diet that sucks. It's the post diet period that sucks.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't have the big looming event that's coming that you have to be prepared for. It's like, okay, well, does it matter if I just eat everything in the world right now?
Absolutely.
I mean, I guess it does, but do I really care? Not exactly.
Not exactly.
So yeah. Yeah. So it's definitely a discipline thing after that, and just going by what your habits had already gotten you to do. And knowing that at least staying the course, and this may help for anybody that's listening and help for you right now, is that if you can make it through the first 6 to 8 weeks post the peak of the diet and have it held together, the next year, 2 years, 3 years can go exactly the way you plan them to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what will happen if it's not controlled, and then that first 6 to 8 weeks starts to go out the window and body fat starts to go up way too quick and the habits start to disintegrate and all the rest of it, you're going to have one hell of a time of trying to plan out what's going to happen, especially on the physique side for the next year or so.
Yeah.
At the very minimum, because you've already went through hell to try and go and diet all the way to the point that you did. If you don't have it under control for the 6 to 8 weeks post, you're not going to be able to get through the adjustment period where your leptin and ghrelin are starting to get back in order. You're starting to find your grounding again, because there's a period of time where hormonally you're not in the place where your body's going to allow you to have moderation if you just let it do what it wants to do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're going to need everything. And if you plan on not stopping yourself because, okay, well, I just did the thing, so now I'm just going to let myself eat a little bit because I deserve it. That kind of thinking ends up getting you way over the edge because there's no stop that your body will perceive. Yeah. It will continuously signal for you to eat more and eat more and eat more because it's gone through an event which it pretty much has simulated itself as starvation.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, absolutely. I experienced that for the first couple of days in particular, where it was, I've been so focused, I've done it now, eat everything in sight. And there was no leptin involved. I just felt hungry, right? And, you know, I'd eat a lot. And then I still think, I'm starving. I'm so hungry. Like, even though I've had a considerably higher amount of food than what I would have been on at the 1700, but then going obviously, you know, probably not the most ideal timing, but going to Italy just after the shoot. But I mean, to be fair, I was able to keep my expenditure in a good place, and after the first couple of days brought my calories back down to a more controlled measure. And since being back, being on quite to a T, I kind of missed being a bit more dialed in. So I kind of felt like when I'm not dialed in from a business perspective, I almost miss a beat here and there as well. So I knew I needed to just have routine back. But that's one thing that I definitely experienced was just food focus and just not having any remorse or feel to, maybe we should stop here. It's just give me everything, right? So that's obviously one really important thing. What else would you say is super important to kind of consider kind of in that reverse diet phase?
I would say the next thing is to make sure that you're spending a little bit of time with loved ones, because honestly, that's one of those things that gets left out, especially at the very end of a diet phase. And we don't always recognize the fact that as much as we are machines to do the thing that we're doing, when we're disciplined and we're moving through all the motions on the daily basis to get through whatever physique goal that we have or even business goal that we may have, we forget that we're communal creatures.
Yeah.
And we need our community around us. And the further that we shutter ourselves in away from them, even if it's for good reason at time, if it continues on and that becomes a part of the habits that were built in the structure that was built around the dieting phase, that can end up really biting you. And you may end up, because I see this very often,
Yeah.
that there's a lot of like emotional turmoil after all these phases are done with.
Yeah.
And people don't often realize the fact that, okay, I haven't talked to my friends in 6 months. So, okay, well, what else do you do? It's like, I get up, I do my cardio, I eat my meals, I go to work, I go to the gym, I go home, I go to sleep. Like,
Yeah.
right, that was good for the fact that you just got everything done, but you haven't spoken to a human being other than me in 6 months. Like,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a really good kind of takeaway point on that people listening could kind of implement, and something that I done was right at the beginning, I kind of set the expectation with my partner. So I sat down with my partner and said, look, this is my goal. This is what I want to achieve. I'd really appreciate sport here, but here's what you need to expect from me. I will be a little bit more absent. My libido is going to drop down. Like, there's going to be times where I might be a bit more groggy, and I apologize in advance, right? Because there's going to be times I might snap and it might be my fault, right? But at these times when I just want you to understand that this could happen. And I think just kind of late, because I think if someone doesn't have their partner on board, or people around them on board with their journey, they're not going to understand it, right? When they're kind of looking at us snapping or us being a little bit more tired or absent, they won't get it because they're either maybe not done it, and if you've got a partner that's done it, then great. But if they haven't, they're going to go, what on earth are you doing? Like, why are you acting like this? What's going on? And I think actually just sitting down and just saying, look, this is going to happen, this is how I'm going to feel, can you support me here? And if they're on board, then I think that can be a huge help as well, because I think if at least then if you are a little bit more absent, they know, right, I know why, as opposed to them then rowling up, and then it just almost becoming this
yep,
back and forth that can never be coming to like an amicable solution. So that's one thing that I done that I guess somebody can kind of take away from this
yep,
podcast and say, you know what, it's something that I can do now. And then obviously thereafter, I suppose you can kind of almost get that, and not anticlimax feeling, but that post, it's like athletes, right? When they win a gold medal and they get almost depressed after, it's like, I've worked so hard for so long to achieve this goal. I've done it. I don't feel like I've got as much purpose, right? And I think, again, another really important thing that I done was I sat down and I goal set. Like, right, I've ticked one box. I need to have another goal in place. Otherwise, I'm going to feel like a lost dog, right? I'm going to feel like I'm just searching for something and for some purpose. You think that's also super important?
yeah, yeah. I think given a little bit of a cool down period, enough time for you to sit in what you just did,
Breathe. Yeah.
because that's just as much of a problem. Not having the next goal in front of you can be just as much of a problem as you trying to jump into the next goal
Way too
before you
fast.
even let it, like, yeah, let the reality of what
Yeah.
you just did sink in,
And I
because
think
that
it would
just
also
takes
cloud your
all of the
judgment.
enjoyment out of it.
That's it. And I think also your judgment's super clouded. Like when you've
Yep.
just finished, like it's quite hard to actually go, what do I really want right here? I've been so
Mhm.
focused for so long. I suppose I just need to let my creativity come back by not thinking, by having downtime, spending time with loved ones, and then I suppose reflecting, reassessing with a clearer mind, right? And I
Yep.
suppose the last thing I think would be really important for people to understand and consider across a stage of photoshoot prep is when aggressively dieting, how to best maintain muscle tissue. What would your biggest advice be for somebody who's aggressively dieting but wanting to retain maximal muscle tissue as well?
Okay, couple things. If you're aggressively dieting, you need to know exactly how aggressively dieting you have to be doing.
Mm,
If you're going way too hard for no reason, so example would be you start at 3,500 calories, you drop to 17 the next day, and then that's what you're going to do from then until like it's over with. You didn't go through a stepwise process to know exactly what was necessary for you to get the drops that you needed to be
yeah,
on pace. Don't try to accelerate the pace that you're moving to such a degree that it's unsustainable.
absolutely.
It may sound good in your head that going extra hard to get yourself there early, like early, as quickly as you possibly could be, sounds great. It's a horrible experience and you're not going to stick to it. So that's the
Absolutely.
first thing. You're not going to get to where you want to be. It's going to suck the whole time. And then you're not going to be able to hold on to tissue because you're not feeding what you actually need to maintain it. And
Yeah,
the biggest part of that leads into the second thing is do not compromise on training.
yeah,
That's the second thing. You cannot compromise on training. And at the point where training is making huge, massive dips, and you cannot do anything to save any part of it and just keeps on going on a downslope, you're looking at muscle tissue losses coming.
Absolutely. And I think, across our journey together, I think apart from the last 2 weeks, we were kind of seeing improvement in resistance training and in lifts throughout the
Yep.
process. I would say I gained strength quite considerably from start to finish throughout the process. And it's only the last 2 weeks when I suppose we were kind of in that, I call it sprint phase, when we're
Yep.
really in that sprint and that deep dieting phase where you start to see a couple of declines coming in place. I suppose to a degree, it's a mindset perspective. I know like the placebo effect of a diet, when you feel like you're restrictive, you almost feel like you got less strength and you're not going to be able to push. So I suppose there's that element as well. But I kind of made it like that little bit of an internal challenge of like, I can't bring myself to write a D on the like increase, maintain or decrease. I can't bring myself to do it unless I physically have to decrease the weight here, because I just don't have it in me to lift. So no, I agree. That's super important. I think it's, the considerations thereafter is also stuff like protein in a good place, your sleep's in a really good place, and making sure your normal habits locked in as well. But Nick, really, really appreciate your time today. That was absolutely incredible for those listening. For those listening, where can they learn a little bit more about you and find your social media?
My social media is all put onto the hub of Instagram. It's where all of the rest of my links and everything is. So on Instagram, it's just my name, Nick Gloff. So you can find me there. And anything else that you need to find me for is also there, linked in my bio.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. And everyone listening, I'll put the link to Nick's Instagram into the show notes as well. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll see everyone on the next episode.